Have you ever thought, why do I suck at fantasy football? Welcome. This is the Commissioner Fantasy Football Podcast.
And welcome back to another episode with the Commissioner, your host, trying to guide you through fantasy football, trying to help you win championships, and the most important thing is to have fun playing fantasy football. Because when it's fun, even if you lose at the end of the season, which sucks, but at least you had some fun during, 3-4 months of the year. So that's why I love fantasy football. All right, let's get into this. Today I'll be talking about drafting. Drafting is one of the most important things you'll do for your team, is because that's when you select the team that you're going to play with for the season. Now, I want you to think about the draft as just a base. You're laying down the foundation for your team. A lot of times at the end of the year, you won't have the same players. Players get injured. You'll make some trades. You'll cut some players won't pan out, they won't be as good, you'll pick somebody else up. So all these things happen during the season. So the way I want you to think about drafting is you're setting a base for yourself. So you're just starting, and this is just the beginning. That's what the draft is. When you're drafting, and I hope in your leagues, and if you're not, I hope you're drafting live, meaning that you guys are getting together. I know because of the whole COVID-19, it's hard to get together. We're trying everything on our end. You know, how many people can get together? Who can? We try to do maybe live stream for them, or something where we have them over the phone. So we're trying to figure everything out just to keep the live drafting, because it makes it so much fun. I'll give you examples. One of our traditions in some of the leagues that I commission, we go to a bar. It's called Biggs in Fullerton. We've been going there, I think, like 4 years in a row or something like that. Another draft that we do live with one of my main leagues as well, we do it at various places. We've done it in Big Bear. We've done a trip out there. We've gone together at somebody else's house. This time we're doing like a poolside so people could be outside. So always trying to come up with ideas of how to get together and draft together, because when you draft live in person, it makes the biggest difference. Because in the beginning, when I started playing fantasy football, we drafted over the phone, which is great. Now you could do Zoom. You know, that's it could be fun. So you could do that. I know a lot of people have been doing that for drafting, for fantasy football drafting. But nothing beats a live draft. The first thing I want to go over is know what kind of draft you are doing. And so most common drafts, most typical drafts out there are called snake drafts. And if you've never drafted before, it could be a little confusing. But this is the most common. I think 90% of leagues do a snake draft. So what happens, and I'll give an example of a 10-team league. So you have 10 teams playing in your league. So what happens is there's going to be an order. And however you determine that order, a lot of leagues just let the app determine it, an hour before, some of it's half an hour before. I'll give you guys examples of what we do and what we have done in the past of trying to determine the draft order. So you're going to have to determine how you're drafting, what order you're drafting. You could have the first pick, you could be the 5th pick. So let's say the order is determined, and let's say in this situation you are pick number 1. I'll use 2 examples. You're pick number 1. So you're the first person picking. So there's not a problem with first. It's great because you could take Christian McCaffrey, you could take Saquon Barkley, Zeke. You could take all these top players. You have the choosing, basically. You have the first choice of whoever you want. Now, what happens is when you get, 1, 2, 3, you get to the 10th position, the person who's picking 10th has also the 11th pick. So that's why it's called a snake. Kind of goes around. So a lot of times, a lot of people love picking in the 10th position. Maybe they won't get the best player, but they have that opportunity of getting that 2 picks in a row. Instead of having 1 good pick, you could get 2 picks in a row. So no matter where you pick, you're going to end up getting good players in the beginning. So that's basically the snake draft. Most leagues are set up that way. It's the best way to draft. Now there are other drafts like a linear draft where you don't have a snake, you have certain picks that you're assigned to and you pick that way. The second most common draft, and I've done it a few times, I'm doing one this year, it's called a auction draft, which this draft is more for experts. But what happens is you have, for example, 200 fake money. Everybody gets $200 fake money. And so what you do is you get together, or you could do it online, and then you start bidding on players. So you go in order, you pick a player. Let's say I pick Zeke. I nominate him and I say, $20 for Zeke. Somebody will come and say 22, 25. A good player can go up to $50, $60, but you have to know that your budget is $200 and you have to choose your entire team under that $200. Last year, I was in an auction league where I think Christian McCaffrey went the highest. I think he won like $72, which was worth it for the person that took them. And for example, last year, I paid in an auction draft for Lamar Jackson $1. Because again, nobody was really picking him, and I kind of took him at the end. I'm like, well, I'll just take this guy, see what happens. I paid $1 for him. So that's a different type of draft. So know the kind of draft you are drafting in. So before you go into the draft, that's pretty important. Moving on to number 2. Understand what ADP is. So if you're looking up players, and if you're looking players, you're going to be drafting players, you're going to be looking up who to draft, when to pick them. There's this thing that comes up all the time, and you'll hear it and you'll read it, ADP. What that means, it's average draft position. So what the industry out there does, and what a lot of these apps do, and every app will vary because they take statistics, they take information from a lot of people drafting already, from a lot of mock drafts. Again, the mock draft is something that you could practice. So most apps have a mock draft. You get on there with other people or a computer. Simultaneously, you're drafting a player and you're kind of practicing. It's a kind of a practice draft. So I would suggest mock drafting before your draft so you can kind of see where players are going. But if you go online, if you find some ratings or something like that, what you want to look for is average draft position. And what that does, it gives you basically it gives you a balance of where the players are going at, where the players are being drafted. So for example, average draft position for Christian McCaffrey is first pick, first round for sure. In the first round, he's the number 1 pick. When you're drafting, you're going to go through rounds. So you're going to have a first round. So if you're in a 10-team league where that 10th pick is finished and you go on to it's called the second round, even though the person's picking 11th, it's a new round. So most leagues have, you're drafting 15, 16 rounds. Some have 14 rounds. You also hear like 0.1, like Christian McCaffrey's 1.1 pick. That means he's picked in the first round, first pick. Second round, first pick, 2.1. There's, if you're picking 10th, 10.1. So a good example, I know if I'm confusing you, I'm sorry, but a good example, if you're the 10th pick, if you have the 10th pick, then you get that 11th pick. You're the snake, the turn, that's called the turn. What happens that is your first pick, the 10th pick, is called 10.1. And then when you get your 11th pick, it's not called the 11th pick, it's called 2.1, beginning the second round. That's why it's a snake. Hopefully that clarifies it. That's why I wanted to get into it and talk about it. So going back to ADP, when somebody says, I'll give you an example of, Patrick Mahomes, his ADP right now, I think it's in the 4th round. And then they could give you a number like 4.5 or 4.6. So it all depends, but that's what they mean when they say ADP, meaning average draft position. I'm gonna give you some quick tips for your draft, okay? Number 1, be prepared. Have some kind of list. Have some kind of list that you, again, Google, and you'll find so many out there, so many experts having their own picks, having their own, the people they're picking in order. So you'll have a list of players that you're picking. One of the tips I would advise, if you're doing it over your phone or if you're doing it live, have a list of all the players. And don't have a complete list of all the players and their positions mixed. You can go online and you can find players in each position. So you have a quarterback position, you have all the running backs in their order where they're being drafted, ADP. Then you'll have your wide receivers, tight ends, your defense. Everybody is ranked. What I would suggest when you're doing that, when you're drafting live or on the phone, is once a player gets drafted on your piece of paper, I would print it out. Some people have used their phones to cross it out. I've started using my phone. There's an app that I go in there and I just click on the name and it highlights the name and they're gone. So again, but even the piece of paper, I used to love doing that, just crossing out the name. So I see, if I'm pick number 10 and Christian McCaffrey gets drafted, I cross him out. Zeke gets drafted, I cross him out. So I know, especially not to, if you're doing it live, if you're not on a computer, you might start picking people that have already been picked. So don't do that. So be prepared and have a piece of paper, and it's going to help you draft better. One of the best advices I can give for drafting. Number 2, do not draft a kicker or a defense until the very last round. As I talked about rounds before, draft the kicker in the 14th, the last 2 rounds. That's what I would suggest. Unless you really want a defense early. Again, we never know. Every year I go into fantasy football, there's always these defenses that nobody drafted them and they're playing amazing and you pick them up from the waiver wire. So don't waste the early pick on a defense. Stack up on running backs. Stack up on wide receivers. So in case somebody gets injured, you already have people on your bench to bring into. Simple stuff. Also, I talked about before, do not draft a quarterback too early, especially in one quarterback leagues. Do not. Unless it's Lamar Jackson, the only exception, maybe Patrick Mahomes. But again, Lamar Jackson, take him in the 3rd. Don't take him in the 2nd or 1st. It's not going to be worth it unless you really want him. Same thing with Patrick Mahomes. Don't take him too early. 3rd round, 4th round, it's pretty good. But every other quarterback, I would suggest don't take them until 9th, 8th round, 10th round, even later. Like I said, Matthew Stafford. Now, because I love Matthew Stafford, if you haven't noticed, everybody now drafts him in my leagues, but other leagues I play in, this guy never gets drafted. And every year, he's just an amazing quarterback. He'll be there for you. He'll put up the points for you. So don't draft a quarterback too early. Also, take the best player available. So don't, when you're drafting, don't, if you have a list of players that you ranked, that you found that people have ranked for you, take the best player out there. And to go on top of that, if you could Google this, tiered players, tiered positions for your draft. So drafting in tiers is one of the best things you can do. So you'll have a tier, for example, I'll use running backs. And all tiers different, but there's a tier for running backs. So Christian McCaffrey is considered in the tier without anybody else. And then you'll have the second 2 players, like I think Barkley and Zeke, go in another tier. They're tier 2. They're not as good as Christian McCaffrey, but they're pretty good, so they got their own tier. And then you'll get a 3rd tier with people like Kamara, Dalvin Cook will be in another tier. So and that's for every position. So you have a quarterback tier, you have a running back tier, and they give you tiers. And so if you're drafting this way, let's say tier 1 and tier 2 are gone for your running backs. Well, tier 1 is still available for your wide receivers. Maybe you need a running back, but hey, go and take that tier 1 or tier higher wide receiver. So I know it might be a little confusing, but Google positions and tiers for your draft. Something that I've been doing and it's been a lot helpful in kind of strategizing your draft, but also keeping on track for your draft. All right, so moving on, I don't want to take too much time here. Like I said before, have a draft strategy. Have something that you're prepared. A lot of people, what I do, and I'll give you my tip on the drafting, I'm preparing myself to do this year. If you're watching, if you're drafting against me, you'll see me do this. I will stack up on running backs. I will go running back heavy. But again, I still won't do that if I see a really good wide receiver available. I'm not going to do that. I'll get that wide receiver even if I wasn't planning to. So my goal right now when I'm doing my drafts is go running back heavy. And the reason I do it, and a lot of people do that, is because running backs, like I said, get injured a lot. So I want to stack up on as many running backs as I can just in case of people getting injured, especially now with COVID-19. Player gets COVID, he might miss 2 weeks. That's going to suck. So I want to have in my draft already players prepared. And running back is one of the most positions that players get injured. So you can read about on Google, you can Google this and you can read about different types of strategies, but have a strategy for yourself. If you want to copy me, I think my strategy is the best. It's a biased opinion, but I love drafting a bunch of running backs. And so in a lot of my leagues that I'm in, people know about this. They already know what I'm going to do, so they start taking all the running backs from me. So, but again, this is what makes it fun. One of the biggest mistakes I made, I'm a big Packers fan, as you can see. Packers. First time I was doing fantasy drafts, I was drafting a lot of Packers. I remember one year I had an Aaron Rodgers on my team, Jordy Nelson, my boy, Jordy Nelson on my team. I think I had their running back, I think it was Starks or, I forgot. Here we go. I just remembered Eddie Lacy, if you remember Eddie Lacy. And then I think I possibly maybe had their defense or maybe another, but I stacked up on a lot of Packers. And that year, Aaron Rodgers got injured. Eddie Lacy got injured. And so basically my team fell apart. So don't try to stack up on your favorite team or any other team. Try to keep it diverse. Again, it's a good tip to know because I went through that couple of years. I drafted a lot of Packers. It didn't work out. Number 4, remember that a draft is just a base, as I mentioned earlier. The draft won't win you your league. You got to understand, just like building a house, you put the base first, and then you start putting up the walls. So think of the draft that way. You're putting the base for your foundation of this house you're going to build. Hopefully, it's a championship house that you can celebrate your championship in. But during the season, when you're picking up players, you're basically building walls. Or you see a player come up or something happens to your team, you're kind of stacking up these walls to build a really good team. And that's going to take you most of the season. So don't think of your draft as, if I draft their wall, that's it, I'm good. Trust me, we always rank our draft picks and we think this guy's going to win the championship. And this guy ends up in last place at the end of the season because he didn't pay attention during the season of picking up the right players. So that's pretty important. All right, so I did talk about that. I talked about tier-based drafting. And again, to conclude, be prepared for your draft. Have something ready. Have a piece of paper. Have something ready on your phone that you're going to cross out names, especially if you're live drafting. Make sure you cross out names. You don't want to be the guy in the 10th round that says, hey, I want DK Metcalf. And they're like, dude, that guy's been drafted. That guy was taken like round 7. You don't want to be that guy. So be prepared. Have a list. Cross out your names. Listen who's picking who. Pay attention. It makes the biggest difference in your draft. So have some kind of a plan. All right, so I'm going to end on this. But again, good luck in your drafts. Have fun. Be prepared. And hopefully you have a good season. And again, if you want any additional tips, just hit me up on Instagram in the direct message. If you have my phone number, hit me up. I love giving tips about drafting, about anything during the season. So I'm always available if you have any advice, anything that you need to know about, pre-drafting or even after your draft, how to set up your team or maybe players to drop, players to pick up. Hit me up anytime. All right. So good luck to everybody. And come on, 2020 season. Hopefully it's not a season of a bunch of COVID-19, people going on injury reserve lists. So again, have fun and good luck. Let's go.
Dude, you better not be sleeping after that podcast. That was an amazing message. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to the YouTube channel, The Commissioner. Also subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Any comments, questions, concerns, send them to the Instagram page, The Commissioner, your fantasy football guide.